When I was young, it was believed that in the 21st century we would have artificial gravity vehicles, free energy in place of fossil fuel consumption, and world peace. However, Chinese historiography holds that history does not advance in a straight line, but moves in a circle, and there are reasons why in China they would believe this. Rather than the nation that wins the space race having technological supremacy, either for the benefit of the Earth or for its own gain, instead, that nation loses interest in space travel and eventually returns to a state before it existed, a state in which people start to doubt that we ever went to the moon. And the nation that uses Einsteinian physics to make energy from nothing should have a supremacy of knowledge, causing as simple statements as, "How can I get some of that?" or "Where will things go from here?" But instead, we become dependent on less developed countries for rare minerals, a form of wealth that predates splitting the atom. No one could have imagined our advanced democracy would be held hostage by political candidates who are barely literate, running on the following platforms. Increased fossil fuel production, which in the past resulted in the rise of coal mining towns with a high rate of illiteracy, not because those two things necessarily go together, but because gas prices are too high isn't a plan for governing. Wanting the price to go down doesn't make you a leader. Concern over rival nations that are basically glorified third world countries unable to feed their own people. Scaling back women's reproductive rights to a time before 1973. Threats of civil war using civilians who drive from their suburban neighborhoods with improvised tactical equipment they purchased online. Now let's look at how this strange turn of events would change if just one of these things fell out of place. Free energy would allow us to leave fuel-dependent countries behind, along with economics itself as we know it, and possibly end human disparity and wars. But let's say you were a big fan of economics and capitalism. Advances in technology are supposed to create a new economy to our own advantage. Just as it seemed in the Cold War that the two sides were working together, the argument that fuels should be deregulated because we answer to a world market is in cahoots with our friendly rival China. If our desire to leave them in the dust was genuine, we would move away from the mineral wealth that is among their few advantages. But let's say none of these platforms is a sin unto itself. A person can be enlightened and still want those things. So let's do justice and imagine any one of them was more than just a hack. Let's say we had better technology to extract fossil fuels, detecting reservoirs wherever they exist and instantly drawing as much as we please, instead of building pipelines that cross over land and oil rigs that cause environmental disasters. It would no longer be a platform for manual labor, which isn't to say coal mining towns would cease to be, just the small number of individuals who control the labor force. Or even civil war. Anyone who studied civil war knows it's disastrous for the losing side. I thought Southerners loved history, which tells me a lot of these people crying civil war are not genuine Confederates or even know what they're saying. So it's not a conservative problem or an industrial problem. They're not real industrialists. So let's say a manual labor party rises up, not knowing they're repeating events of a century ago. This circular history started when our rapid advancement in science and civics changed course when it was discovered that information is power. If you can control what people know, then you don't need real wars, policies, or issues. Thomas Edison and other inventors lived in a time of honesty, when all you had to do was build something that works. Today, any group of so-called experts online is on the verge of being shut down due to animalistic behavior. I heard a presenter say, "This isn't a joke like cold fusion," and this phrase has come to be used every day of the week. Nobody knows if any progress was made with cold fusion because it's more important to prop up your social status on a computer. So in this circular history, the biggest issue will be that some humans have been reduced to tribalism, like a community that refuses to use medical treatment. Have you seen the commercial where the boy loves science, but the girl has her trusty bow? It challenges gender stereotypes, but instead of classrooms watching scientific achievements together, the biggest educational need will be how to deal with stupid, or whatever you want to call it. Just like today's gender reforms, classrooms will have to measure a person's self-determined educational limits with a checklist of which reality they want to live in. It might become trendy to reverse the word and call themselves dippets, which is something we can't allow to happen. And I'm going to rephrase that very carefully. People who aren't intellectually inclined are valued citizens with wisdom we don't have, and if you want to shake your fist for reforms that benefit them, then it ceases to be lacking in any way. I'm an anarchist, and I can tell you, if you want anarchy, then let this happen. If there was free energy for the world, a number of countries would still be using a legacy system of petroleum, rivalry, tribal politics, and reduced civil rights, and that would be the third world. This is not a defense of science or a criticism of being old-fashioned. The old ways were better than the ways we're using now in many respects. Being enlightened means you can discuss any subject in its own context beyond your personal opinions. If you don't know where today's science is, let's say in fuel production, then how do you know you're not using ethanol? If you're running a campaign to focus on a rival nation while there are multiple issues at home that aren't on your radar, what prevents you from telling your voters it's not this country but some other country now? Likewise, if you're declaring war without knowing what that means, how do you know who your enemy is or what battles you need to choose? And if you're a woman who doesn't know what your legal rights are, so none of these is really about the choice that's being presented, and therefore you're giving up that choice if you vote for that person. There are always further thoughts to be had. I'm interested in hearing yours, especially from the conservative side. Thank you for listening.